30 years on death row. Executed just weeks after the witnesses who helped convict him suddenly changed their stories. On July 15, 2025, Michael Bernard Bell was put to death by the state of Florida, but the timing raised questions no one could ignore. This wasn't just the end of a case. It was the collision of revenge, mistakes, and a justice system that refused to slow down. What really happened that night outside a Jacksonville bar? And what happened decades later that made people question everything? Because once you hear the full story, the ending doesn't feel as simple as guilty or innocent. 5 months before the shooting that would change everything, Michael Bernard Bell lost his brother. Lamar Bell had been shot and killed by a man named Theodore Wright, and when the courts ruled it self-defense, the case was closed, at least on paper. But for Mike, it never ended. He couldn't accept the decision, couldn't let it go, and didn't pretend to. To anyone who would listen, he made one thing clear: this wasn't over. As the months passed, his anger didn't cool off. It sharpened. Friends and people close to him heard the same promise repeated again and again. He said he was going to handle it himself. No lawyers, no courts, just payback. By late 1993, it wasn't talk anymore. Through his girlfriend, Mike got his hands on an AK-47, a loaded magazine, and enough ammunition to make sure there were no second chances. Whatever line still existed between grief and revenge was gone. But when the night finally came, one critical mistake would turn everything sideways, and innocent people would end up in the crosshairs. On the night of December 9th, 1993, Mike thought he had found his target. Outside a Jacksonville liquor lounge, he spotted a yellow Plymouth parked near the entrance. To him, that car meant one thing: Theodore Wright, the man he believed had gotten away with killing his brother. What Mike didn't know was that the car had changed hands. Theodore no longer owned it. He had sold it to his half-brother, 22-year-old Jimmy West. Inside the lounge that night, Jimmy wasn't alone. He was with 18-year-old Tama Smith and another young woman, none of them aware they were about to walk into someone else's revenge. Mike didn't wait to confirm anything. He rushed home, picked up 2 friends, grabbed the rifle, pulled on a mask, and came back. The yellow car was still there. That was all he needed to see. When Jimmy and Thomas stepped outside and climbed into the car, Mike emerged from the darkness. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He walked up to the open door, raised the rifle, and opened fire. 12 rounds tore through Jimmy, ending his life instantly. Tama tried to duck, but 4 bullets struck her. She was still alive when help arrived, but she didn't make it to the hospital. The third woman curled into the floorboard, bullets flying inches above her, and somehow survived. And just when it seemed like the damage couldn't get worse, Mike turned away from the car, toward the crowd waiting outside the lounge. As people stood frozen outside the lounge, Mike opened fire again. Bullets ripped into the front of the building, sending dozens diving for cover. Screams cut through the chaos as people hit the pavement, not knowing where the shots were coming from or who would be next. Some rounds even punched through a nearby house where 3 children were inside at the time. By sheer luck, none of them were hit. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. Mike disappeared into the night before police could lock down the scene. No chase, no arrest, just shell casings and silence where 2 young lives had been moments earlier. Hours later, he showed up at his aunt's house. When she asked what was going on, he didn't panic or dodge the question. He looked straight at her and said Theodore had taken his brother, and now he had taken Theodore. To him, the score was settled, even though he'd gotten the wrong man. Despite witnesses and the carnage left behind, it would take nearly a year before police finally closed in on him. And when they did, it wasn't because of forensic evidence or a lucky break. It came from somewhere no one expected, inside a prison yard. The case didn't crack open on the streets. It cracked open behind bars. Nearly a year after the shooting, 2 inmates already serving time reached out to investigators with a name. They said they knew who was responsible for the Jacksonville lounge attack, and both pointed to Michael Bernard Bell. One of them went even further, claiming he had actually seen the shooting happen. At first, the claims raised eyebrows. Jailhouse witnesses weren't exactly known for telling stories without expecting something in return. But on the record, both men insisted there were no deals, no reduced sentences, no favors. Just the truth, sworn under oath in open court. And their stories lined up enough to get law enforcement moving again. Then someone even closer to Mike stepped forward. His girlfriend, Erica Williams, confirmed what police had long suspected but couldn't prove. She admitted she had helped him get the weapon used in the attack, an AK-47, purchased just 1 day before Jimmy West and Tama Smith were killed. That single admission tied everything together. With witness testimony stacking up and the weapon accounted for, the window was closing fast. Mike was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But once the trial began, the story was about to get even darker. As the trial unfolded, it became clear the lounge shooting wasn't an isolated explosion of rage. Bit by bit, a much longer and more disturbing history started to surface. One that most people, including investigators, hadn't known about until Mike himself admitted it. It went back to 1989, when he was just 19 years old. During an argument while driving through Jacksonville with his girlfriend and her 2-year-old son in the car, something snapped. Mike pulled over, stepped out, and opened fire. Both of them were killed. He later claimed it was over infidelity, but no explanation could soften what happened next. Then came another killing in 1993. After a heated dispute with his mother's boyfriend, a man known for being abusive, Mike didn't confront him in the moment. Instead, he waited. Hours later, he tracked him down at his home and shot him multiple times on the front porch. It wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. By the time the jury heard everything, the picture was hard to ignore. This wasn't one tragic mistake. It was a pattern, escalating violence that ended with 5 people dead. And once that reality set in, the verdict felt almost inevitable. The jury didn't hesitate for long. In 1995, Michael Bernard Bell was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, and the recommendation was unanimous: death. The court pointed to multiple aggravating factors: the calculated nature of the attack, the number of victims, and the danger posed to everyone nearby. Any sympathy left in the room vanished. Mike's legal team fought back hard. They argued the trial was poisoned by bias, pointing to the prosecutor's language and even remarks made by his own defense attorney in front of a mostly white jury. They questioned witness credibility, raised concerns about his mental state, and argued his age should have mattered more. But every appeal ran into the same wall: denied, again and again. Years turned into decades. Mike sat on Florida's death row while the state's execution pace quietly picked up. Then in June 2025, the governor signed his death warrant, making him one of several executions planned that year, something Florida hadn't done in decades. The date was set, July 15th. It looked final, locked in. But just weeks before the execution, a twist emerged that no one saw coming. Just when it seemed there was nothing left to revisit, one of the men who helped put Mike on death row broke his silence. Henry Edwards, a key witness at the original trial, came forward with a new, sworn statement. Back in the 90s, he had told jurors he watched Mike pull on a ski mask, walk up to a yellow car, and open fire. He claimed he expected nothing in return, no deal, no pressure. Now, decades later, he said that story wasn't true. According to Henry, he never saw the shooting at all. He said he was inside a store when the gunfire erupted. What he did claim was that a detective showed him Mike's photo, told him exactly what to say, and made it clear there would be consequences if he didn't cooperate. In exchange, Henry said he was promised time out of jail. Then, just days later, another bomb dropped. Charles Jones, the second jailhouse witness, also changed his story. He said there was never a confession, never an attempt to sell a weapon. Instead, he claimed his testimony had been coached, rehearsed, and quietly rewarded. According to him, both law enforcement and the prosecution needed his words to seal the case, and they got them. If these claims were true, it wasn't just an error. It was manufactured evidence. Mike's attorneys rushed to court, arguing this changed everything. But the judge disagreed, ruling the new statements wouldn't have altered the verdict. The execution date stayed exactly where it was. And with no more delays, the final hours closed in fast. On the morning of July 15th, 2025, Michael Bernard Bell woke up just after sunrise. It was his last day. At 6:30 a.m., he was served his final meal, an omelet, bacon, home fries, and a glass of orange juice. No family came to see him. No final visits. Just a brief meeting with a spiritual advisor as the hours slipped away. Behind the scenes, his legal team made one last attempt, filing an emergency appeal and hoping the U.S. Supreme Court would step in. They didn't. The request was denied, and the schedule stayed intact. By early evening, there was nowhere left to turn. At 6 p.m., Mike was strapped to the gurney inside the execution chamber. 5 lines were inserted as witnesses watched in silence. When asked if he had any last words, he looked up and thanked the state for not letting him spend the rest of his life in prison. Minutes later, the drugs began to flow. His chest rose once, then went still. At 6:25 p.m., Michael Bernard Bell was pronounced dead. He was 54 years old. And even with the execution over, the question remains, was this the end of a violent story, or the closing chapter of something far more unsettling? Michael Bernard Bell's story doesn't end cleanly. On one side, there's the undeniable trail of violence, 5 people dead, lives destroyed, and a man who repeatedly chose revenge over restraint. For many, the sentence felt earned, the outcome unavoidable. But on the other side, there's the timing. Key witnesses changing their stories decades later, allegations of pressure, coaching, and deals made behind closed doors. A system that acknowledged the claims and still refused to slow down. Even with those doubts hanging in the air, the process moved forward like nothing had changed. So what does justice really look like here? Is it about punishment, no matter what, or about certainty beyond all doubt? Once the needle was pushed and the clock stopped, there was no way to revisit the truth, only to debate it. And that's the part that still unsettles people. Not just what Michael Bernard Bell did, but whether the system that judged him was willing to question itself before it was too late.